2024 was a surprisingly great year for game releases, all things considered. I expected a slow year after the insanity that was 2023, but this year was pretty stacked in its own right. And so today I'll be talking about all of my favorite games of 2024. This list isn't meant to be a definitive games of the year list or anything like that, it's just my personal favorites. And final disclaimer, if you don't see your favorite 2024 game in this video, it doesn't mean I dislike it, I probably just didn't play it. So let's get right into it with a game that I consider to be the most underrated game of the year. Prince of Persia: The Lost Crown presented a bold new direction for the long-dormant franchise. What had primarily been a 3D action-adventure series was going to shift into a 2D Metroidvania for this entry. The Lost Crown was developed by Ubisoft Montpellier, the same team that brought us Rayman Origins and Rayman Legends, two games that I consider to be among the best 2D platformers of all time. Once I heard that fact, I was very excited for the game, and thankfully it did not disappoint. The Lost Crown stars Sargon, a member of the warrior group known as the Immortals. When their prince is kidnapped, Sargon must travel to Mount Kof to save him, but once here, time begins to warp. This time-bending mechanic is the core of the Lost Crown, both in terms of its narrative and its gameplay. Sargon must reverse time to save the prince, all while his former friends try to stop him. This theme of multiple timelines has become somewhat overdone recently, and it's very easy to mess up, but the Lost Crown is able to do it perfectly, featuring just enough deception and plot twists to keep you engaged without ever becoming overly confusing or hard to follow. As much as I did like the story, the ultimate enjoyment definitely comes from the gameplay. The game has all of the typical Metroidvania elements you would expect, featuring a large variety of new upgrades and abilities as you progress. There is of course also a lot of backtracking to previously explored areas where you will find new pathways opening up thanks to these new abilities. In other words, if you're a fan of the Metroidvania genre, you will no doubt enjoy this game. But even to those who don't typically enjoy Metroidvanias, I think you will find something to love here. The Lost Crown features some fantastic platforming sections that can feel artful as you string together Sargon's various abilities. As for the combat, it primarily focuses on dodging and counters as you wait for your time to strike. Combine that with a large amount of enemy variety and many different special moves, and the combat stayed feeling fresh and rewarding throughout my entire 20-hour playthrough. The boss battles are the highlight of the combat, displaying some incredible set pieces that can be genuinely breathtaking. The Lost Crown feels incredibly high budget for a game in this genre, and seeing what I would describe as a AAA take on Metroidvania was a really cool experience. Unfortunately, The Lost Crown didn't get the love it deserved this year. Many players seemed hesitant to give it a try due to the franchise's genre shift, the negative perception of Ubisoft games, or the somewhat high launch price compared to other Metroidvanias. If you're one of those who previously skipped this game for any of those reasons, please consider giving The Lost Crown a chance. Metroidvanias have become surprisingly frequent in recent years, and their recurring themes and gameplay loops can sometimes make them blend together, so that makes it all the more impressive that The Lost Crown was able to stand out for me the way it did. For my next favorite game of 2024, let's talk about one that has proven to be quite controversial. Pal World, or as it's more commonly known, Pokemon with Guns, released into early access at the beginning of this year on Steam. The game has been shrouded in controversy for its character models that look suspiciously similar to the other Pocket monsters out there. In recent months, the developers of the game Pocket Pair were hit with a lawsuit from Nintendo due to some of the similarities, primarily the throwing balls to capture monsters mechanic. Ironically though, Pal World actually does not share a whole lot of similarities to Pokemon in the gameplay department. While mainline Pokemon games are turn-based RPGs, Pal World is a survival game. And I'm gonna be honest with you, I'm a bit surprised that this game made it onto my list. On paper, it's not the kind of game I would typically enjoy. I don't play a whole lot of early access stuff and don't often find myself getting very invested in survival games. But with all the hype Pal World was getting, I had to give it a try, and it clicked for me immediately. The gameplay of Pal World centers around a few main objectives. The first is catching all of the different pals around the map. This is the only part of the gameplay that truly resembles Pokemon to me. I found it to be incredibly fun to catch them all, and the system they had where you gained a lot of XP for your first 10 catches of each pal was super addictive. The next main gameplay loop is leveling up your character and building a base full of structures that can farm materials or build new items. The pals you collect can be used here to build or farm for you while you go off doing other things. It leads to a satisfying management experience as you juggle everything. The last major thing to do in the game are the big battles with the bosses, but I honestly ignored these because I found them to be very unfun. I'm not sure if these have been updated at all, but when I played the game initially, these bosses were just total sponges, and the grind to get your pals to a high enough level to fight them was obnoxious. But aside from the bosses, I enjoyed everything the game had to offer. Exploring the open world, feeling my characters and base getting stronger, and discovering all the weird little oddities Pal World has to offer was just flat out addicting. I really debated whether to include Palworld on my list or not, but considering I put nearly 40 hours into it in the span of like a month, it's hard for me to say it wasn't one of my favorite games this year. I may not have stuck with it long term, but Palworld truly enamored me for the month I played it, for all the good and bad that came alongside it. And in the end, I think that deserved a mention in this video. But now let's talk about a game that I can more confidently say was one of the best this year. Helldivers 2 was the surprise game of the year for me. I had kept up with its development and never found myself feeling overly excited for it. I wasn't sure how Helldivers would work in 3D compared to the top-down perspective found in the original 2015 entry. Through the various trailers and marketing showcases, I struggled to get a grasp on what Helldivers 2 was aiming to be, and honestly wasn't even planning on playing it. But then the game launched, and the clips started hitting social media. The game went super viral, and the constant stream of funny moments, absurd death animations, and crazy swarms of enemies painted the picture of the game better than any trailer could. I bought the game to play with some friends, and my obsession for the next several months began. Helldivers 2 is a truly special game, bringing something to the table that most other developers are unwilling or maybe even unable to bring nowadays. In an era of multiplayer gaming where the focus is always on competitive play and PvP, Helldivers 2 took a different approach, creating a cooperative experience akin to what we used to get often many years ago. Helldivers 2 isn't about getting the most kills or achieving the highest rank, it's about blowing stuff up with your friends and having fun. I don't think I even realized how much I really missed this kind of game until developer Arrowhead gave it back to me this year. The gameplay loop of Helldivers 2 is fairly simple, having you embark on missions across the galaxy featuring main and optional objectives throughout. While there, you will spend most of your time fighting off ferocious hordes of enemies with the use of your primary weapons and abilities. After missions, you will gain XP, currency, and materials for upgrades and new weaponry. Then you do it all over again. But the game always feels like a blast thanks to its variety of objectives and weaponry, a movement system that allows you to feel like a true action hero, and its unique system of calling in abilities without ever interrupting gameplay. Combine that with the fun that comes from playing games with your friends, and you're left with an unmatched experience. Helldivers 2's gameplay is so addictive and high octane that I would often find myself losing track of time while playing. It was one of those games where I would log in and then suddenly look at a clock and realize 4 hours had gone by in the blink of an eye. Aside from the gameplay, Helldivers 2 features some great lore and storytelling, mixing humor and political commentary with gameplay elements and in-game story events. The game features an awesome system where the developers lay out certain challenges or goals for the players, and the in-game story is affected by these actions. My favorite example was when they teased mechs coming to the game, but then they announced production of mechs had been halted and the Helldivers would have to liberate the planet to get production going again. Once the players cleared out the planet, the developer released mechs into the game. It's fairly simple, but it's a highly effective form of storytelling in a multiplayer game setting that I absolutely loved. I know Helldivers had some rough patches this year, specifically with some bad weapon tuning updates that have now been mostly reversed, and I know that content updates slowed significantly towards the middle to end of the year. I had kinda stopped playing consistently by that point, so I can't speak much on that, but what I can say is that for the several months following its February release date, Helldivers 2 was genuinely the only multiplayer game I wanted to play. In a market that is so saturated, I find that extremely impressive. Even if I'm not consistently playing the game anymore, the fun memories I made with Helldivers 2 will stick with me far past 2024, making it an easy choice for one of my favorite games this year. Now let's switch gears from the kinetic insanity of Helldivers to a much different 2024 game. Neva is an indie game from developer Nomada Studios which tells the story of Alba and her wolf companion Neva as they try to save the land from darkness. Neva tells a story of the circle of life, featuring themes of adulthood and death as you make your way through the 4 seasons in a year. The game is able to tell a deeply impactful tale despite only ever having one line of spoken dialogue. The beautiful pastel color art style is breathtaking, composed of what appears to be primarily hand-drawn animation. There are multiple moments throughout the game where I just stopped and stared for minutes at a time, trying to take it all in. While Neva's selling point will certainly be its story and art, the gameplay here is serviceable as well. The combat is fluid as you fight off the game's surprisingly unsettling creatures. The way Neva is incorporated into combat is also incredibly cool. At the beginning of the game, Neva is small and will hide throughout most combat encounters, but by the end of the game, Neva is the primary form of attack as the wolf grows bigger, stronger, and most of all, braver. It's just one of the many ways the developers were able able to perfectly convey their message without ever having to spell it out. Overall, the gameplay was never difficult enough to take away from the flow of the story, but the game also isn't a simple cakewalk. This keeps Neva from feeling like a walking simulator, which can sometimes happen with these kinds of games. I hesitate to say much more because the game is quite short, so anything else I say may be giving too much away. It only took me about 5 hours to see everything Neva had to offer, and yet it was still one of the first games I knew I wanted to talk about in this video, and I think that paints a perfect picture of the lasting impression it left on me. If you're a fan of these kinds of games, please do not miss out on Neva. The next game on my list isn't as much of a critical darling as Neva, but it was one that resonated with me in a big way. The Mario and Luigi franchise was a childhood favorite of mine. Something about these games just absolutely enamored me, but unfortunately the franchise was lost to time. With the original development team being shut down and nearly 10 years having passed since the last new entry in the series, I had given up hope. That is, until Nintendo shocked the world by announcing a brand new Mario and Luigi game would be releasing in 2024. And with that came Mario and Luigi Brothership, a deeply flawed RPG that I just can't help but love. In Brothership, Mario and Luigi are teleported from the Mushroom Kingdom to a new place called Concordia. It's here that they must reconnect all of the islands to save the land and also allow them to make it back home. The story has some nice twists and turns throughout. New and old characters alike will make Mario and Luigi fans happy, and the classic humor the series is known for returns. But what I loved most about Brothership was its art style and animation. This series has always been 2D, with many of the games being pixel art, but Brothership goes fully 3D, bringing a unique art style that is new to not just the Mario and Luigi series, but the Mario franchise in general. The animation in the game is truly fantastic, highlighted best during combat with the special moves. The Mario and Luigi series has always been famous for these special moves, but there was only so much they could do with the prior art style. In Brothership, the animations that accompany these moves are so flashy and stylish. They feel how I always envisioned them in my head as a kid while playing the older games. The combat is so satisfying as you try to time your A and B button presses that correspond with each brother. Brothership also introduces battle plugs that add variables to each fight. Battle plugs can give you an extra attack, a free item, increased damage, and much more. I thought this new mechanic truly improved combat, adding a lot of extra strategy to the way you play. Oftentimes I found the new mechanics added to modern Mario RPGs tend to do more harm than good, but they actually nailed it here. As the game progresses and you unlock new moves and new battle plugs, combat continues feeling fresh and exciting. The game truly starts to open up so much more as it goes on, which is a great thing, but also the game's biggest weakness at the same time. I say that because the game starts slow, and I mean really slow. The game struggles with its pacing in general. There are long stretches of dialogue without much interactivity, areas that stretch on for frustratingly long, or storylines that can feel unnecessary. Brothership is really just longer than it needs to be in general, with the game taking me over 40 hours to complete. That was for the main story and most side missions. I must admit, I did not anticipate spending 40 hours with this game when I bought it. The ending especially drags on really badly. There are about 3 different times where you think the game is reaching a good place to end, only for it to continue on for multiple more hours. It's not to say that the story is bad. I actually think it's pretty intriguing, incorporating what I interpreted as some thought-provoking parallels to our real life. Despite the issues present in Brothership, I never wanted to stop playing. That itch from the combat was always there, and I had to keep scratching. And despite some flaws, the overarching story was enough to keep me engaged the whole way through. Overall, I think Brothership is actually a really easy game to predict whether you will like it or not. Most Mario and Luigi games suffer from these same issues of pacing, and so if you love those games, I see no reason why you won't also love Brothership. It brings you everything you would expect from a Mario and Luigi game. However, if those issues were too much for you to overcome and you don't like prior entries in the franchise, you probably won't like this one either. Brothership is a unique one on this list because I definitely don't think it's one of the best games of the year, but considering how much time I spent with it, how much enjoyment I was able to get out of it, and how much this franchise means to me, I couldn't not include it. Before we get into my personal favorite game of the year, I want to give an honorable mention to a multiplayer game that has taken over my life in recent weeks. The amount of time I've spent playing Marvel Rivals since it launched just a few weeks ago is becoming concerning. The game is a genuine blast that brings me right back to the days of early Overwatch in 2016. And similarly to the early days of Overwatch, Marvel Rivals is far from perfect, but that's also part of what makes it so appealing. Marvel Rivals has been able to break through into one of the most overdone and crowded genres around, live service hero shooters. Obviously, the Marvel IP is a big reason for this success, but I also think that's oversimplifying things and not giving the developers their credit. The game itself has done a lot of great things to make it stand out. First of all, I love the cartoony, cartoony comic book art style. This game is how I want my superhero games to look. It makes me feel like I am flipping through pages of a comic book as these matches play out. I also love the designs they went for with these characters, often basing them on their comic book designs rather than always sticking by the more well-known MCU looks. In terms of gameplay, Marvel Rivals is basically exactly what you would expect from a game in this genre, but something about the massive cast of characters and insane variety of abilities just all flows together so perfectly to make for a chaotically fun experience. And I think that's the major caveat here with Marvel Rivals. This is a game to play with your friends, have fun, and get some laughs. I do not recommend this as a competitive game whatsoever, and so I'm not totally sure how it will age or how long I will continue playing it. If this game had come out in February, for example, would it even be close to making this list? I genuinely don't know. Only time will tell how I feel about Marvel Rivals long term, but for now, it has been one of the most refreshing and fun experiences I've had in 2024, and I think that deserved a shout out. Okay, now it's time for my favorite game of the year, and if you've watched this channel before and know my tastes, it's probably not a very surprising one. Astrobot is one of those moments where I feel like a game was made for me. Not only am I a huge PlayStation fan who obsesses over their history, but platformers are also one of my favorite genres. So when you present to me Astrobot, a 3D platformer where you must save all of PlayStation's iconic characters, there is literally no scenario where I don't love this game. But Astrobot is more than just a nostalgia trip for PlayStation fans. It is a legitimately fantastic platformer that I feel rivals the all-time greats. Astrobot exudes the imagination, creativity, and pure joy that will remind you of when you first fell in love with video games all those years ago. I don't know if I can remember the last time I smiled as much as I did while playing through this game. Each new bot I found was an incredible moment as I recognized the character and had my memories of that particular franchise rush back into my head. But even if you are someone who doesn't know PlayStation that well or even care about PlayStation at all, you will still love Astrobot. Every single level feels different from the last, dropping new power-ups, gimmicks, and surprises at every turn. The production value is on another level, with colors that pop off the screen and a killer soundtrack that will be stuck in your head for weeks after playing. I have almost nothing to complain about in this game. It was genuinely perfect. If I had to nitpick, my only complaint would be I wish the game was a bit longer and more challenging at times. But even that is barely a complaint because it's really just me wishing I had gotten to spend more time playing it. What developer Team Asobi was able to achieve here is astounding, taking a team of around 60 people and creating one of the greatest modern day platformers ever. I truly hope PlayStation makes more games like this in the future. And when I say more games like this, I don't just mean 3D platformers, I mean more games in general that differ from their typical style. And I would also like to see PlayStation embrace their history more like they did with this game. PlayStation has such a rich catalog of games and franchises from the last 30 years, but it's so rare that they truly embrace and celebrate them. And that's why I'm so happy to see Astrobot isn't just a game made for me. It's a game that has resonated with seemingly everyone who plays it. To see Astrobot win Game of the Year at the Game Awards was an incredible moment that I hope will change the way PlayStation and AAA game studios in general judge what can be a success in this industry. Astrobot is a must-play for anyone who loves PlayStation, 3D platformers, or just anyone who loves video games in general. There was no game this year that brought me more laughs, joy, and fun than Astrobot did. It was an absolute no-brainer to name it my favorite game of 2024.